Theme is Botvinnik's preemptive strike against the King's Indian plan, as we call it KID, the kid. This time the kid, his opponent, as you see, is none other than Victor the Terrible, Victor Korchnoi. In 1952, you might have seen this example, maybe not. So I just want a quick poll, and you can just let me know in the chat if you have seen this position or this example somewhere. Let me know in the chat. If not, that's okay. I mean, this is a pretty old game. Okay, and I haven't. No, I haven't. Okay, good. So this is maybe new for a lot of you. Now, what is this preemptive strike against the King's Indian plan? And you might have even seen this concept before. And the point here is, of course, White's long-term plan here. He's got really only one plan. Black's got a protected passer, 2 bishops. So what Korchnoi was trying to do, he learned from the classics that you're supposed to blockade the protected passer, just like Nimzovich taught us, right? And then at some point, he wants to play f4. Okay, he has to watch out for this knight g4 move, right? So maybe he wants to play h3 first, and then expand on the king side. This is called King's Indian expansion. Very, very powerful plan. And if Black does nothing, doesn't react, there could be consequences, right? There could be an attack, although I doubt White's going to generate a powerful attack without the dark square bishop, but still, it's not obvious how one stops this attack. So first question is, how would you play as Black? So as always, please type your answers in the chat, and I'll take a look. So Black to move, how would you consider preemptively dealing with this plan? So White wants to slowly put knight on d3, maybe pawn on h3, maybe f4. Okay, let's see what people are saying. Bishop d6. I'm not sure how bishop d6 deals with this whole king side expansion. You may be threatening bishop takes a3, but it's not quite what Botvinnik had in mind. All right, interesting. Interesting from Angela. One day we can play knight h5. Very logical idea. Very interesting move, knight h5. The problem, guys, is with the knight on h5, you're only temporarily stopping this f4 push because they can play knight d3 and slowly prepare. And the problem is the knight on h5 is really loose piece, right? Remember the famous saying, knight on the edge of the board, knight on the rim is green, right? So very, very bad knight on h5. Aha, queen c8 from Eric. Very interesting idea, queen c8 to stop h3 altogether. The problem, though, you have the most powerful piece doing all the defense work for you, right? Queen on c8. You probably are going to be tied up with that queen there. So interesting idea, not quite. All right, so great. So most of you may not know this idea, hopefully. Then you can learn a lot from the strategic game. So the answer, guys, is unusual move, very unusual move. You play h5. So notice that pawn was on h6 at some point, then he just plays h5. Wait a second, what is the point of this move, h5? And this is basically the entire lesson, conceptual lesson. You have to use the rook pawn and against the potential f4 push. Potential is the key word because right now f4 is not even a threat. Remember the key is knight g4. So let's see how the game unfolds. So f4, knight g4, as I mentioned, not a big deal. So knight d3 was played. And now, of course, h4 exclam. How many of you have seen this idea before? Using harry the h pawn to sort of preemptively, yeah, kind of like alpha zero, right, guys? But a little bit different than alpha zero because we're actually not necessarily trying to get the pawn to h3, although we can, nothing wrong with that. But the most important idea is when you want to discourage the move h3 yourself, because then it's going to be impossible to play f4. And when the pawn takes on the h4, well, this pawn structure is absolutely horrible for white. So you just let the pawn sit there for a bit, then you can take or push h3, alpha 0 style. Of course, back then there was no alpha 0. So instead of the move h3, which I think is still a powerful idea, going for total domination, I think very simple move that that Botvinnik played against Korchnoi. Queen e7 makes a lot of sense. He's not afraid of f4. Knight g4 is coming. He's keeping an eye on the c5 pawn. Knight c4, logical move. Again, it seems like white sort of says, you know what, I've got these 3 pawns, 2 knights, and I'm going to start my counter strike here on the queen side, Benoni style, right? Think of reverse Benoni when you think about this queen side expansion. Okay, so we got to deal with that. So very instructive moment coming up. Pawn takes. Again, f4 we're not too worried about now that there's no h2 pawn. Bishop c7. Botvinnik says, all right, I'm ready for you, mister. b4 and b5 exclam. Again, very important prophylactic idea against the expansion, right? You don't want to give him too much space. You play b5, discouraging him to take. He could take, but that's not that great. Opening the file where the queen is. 2 bishops get more space. So he goes back to d2. Now you've locked down the queen side. Notice how this pawn is a protected passer, so is the d4 pawn, and they sort of cancel each other out. But the battle is being won on the king side, guys. So I want to show you how Botvinnik plays it. So we have blockading bishop. He's got a blockading knight, so they kind of do this defensive roles, right? But this bishop on g2 is sort of a dead piece. It's only a defensive piece. This knight is protecting the pawn. But the most important part of all of this is, of course, the g4 outpost. Good question. If you have the bishop pair, shouldn't you try to open the position? So why close? Very good question. Generally speaking, yes, you want to open up the position. But here, the reason why you want to close up the queen side is because your opponent has an extra pawn there. So there is no counterplay anymore on the queen side for white. And black eventually does want to open up the position, guys. It's going to be against the enemy king. What is black's plan? At some point, we're going to put knight on g4, right? We can play g6, king g7, rook h8, and maybe even transfer the queen, slowly checkmate him. But the most important part, he has no counterplay. Korchnoi sort of wants to play f4, right? I mean, that's really his only active plan. On one hand, he wants. On the other hand, that looks super risky with the knight coming to g4. And g6, Botvinnik says, oh yeah, I'm going to play king g7, rook h8. Please play f4. That's your most active plan. Okay, not yet. Knight b3 is played. King g7. He's not really worried about knight a5. f4. Finally, white says, you know what? This is my only active plan in the position. I'm going to go for it. Otherwise, I'm just going to slowly lose the game. And guess what? Perfect timing, knight g4, exclam. Black's plan is now complete. So the strategic masterpiece, right, that started with the move h5 in the starting position that I gave you, now is complete. With the knight on g4, this is a very powerful knight, right? White has no attack. As a matter of fact, black can generate the attack with knight coming to e3. And I'm not going to show you the complete game because actually Botvinnik messed up later and the game does lose its instructive value. Korchnoi fought really hard and made the draw. So I'm just going to show you a couple more moves here. F takes E happened. Rook a d8, very strong intermezzo move to simply protect the d pawn. Guess what? This guy's not going anywhere. And then after queen b2, knight takes e5. Pretty serious domination. So obviously taking on d4 is bad, right? We can just play rook takes d4 and rook d8. So knight f4 is happening because knight's coming to d5, but we're not too afraid. We can play around that knight. Knight c4, already a pretty sizable strategic advantage. I would even call that strategically winning because this knight whenever it lands here, right, we just need to get our queen out of the way here or here. This pawn is weak, and this guy is a big monster. The knight is coming in, very uncomfortable position. All right, so this is the beginning of the so-called the Botvinnik preemptive strike against the King's Indian plan. Now that you know about this plan, you can actually apply it to many different positions. So I'm going to give you some examples. All right, let's go to the next example. So here we're actually going to take white side in this game. Now this game is played by two players from Yugoslavia. The country doesn't even exist anymore in 1988. But what really matters is the opening. So I want to show you the opening in its entirety because the strategic concepts are just as important in the opening as in the middle game. So c4, e5, we actually have a totally different opening. It's not King's Indian yet. It's called the English opening, but that's okay. We can transpose. Knight c3, d6. So clearly Black's intention is he's building this King's Indian structure. He's going to try to go for this plan. White plays d4. Very clever idea. If you want to sort of stop or invite Black into taking this pawn, you can do that. You do lose a tempo if he takes, but the problem is after knight here, queen here, you're going to get this dream position with a double fianchetto, the knight coming here, and this beautiful outpost. Of course, things are not so simple. White did lose a few tempi. Black has to play what I call dynamic chess. You can't just slowly allow white to execute this plan. But this is a different story altogether. Instead, Black plays his planned King's Indian move, knight to d7, knight f3, g6. So again, we're transposing from the English, e4, bishop g7, and Black is being very clever, guys. He knows in the King's Indian, you want to play f5 eventually. So look what he does next. After bishop e2, he plays knight to e7. That's the benefit of this move order. Of course, white is not obliged to push the d pawn at all. He does have to play d5. In the game, though, he said, you know what? I'm just going to go for it, grab as much space as I can. Okay. Black plays the most obvious move in the world, which I think is a mistake, by the way. Castles. I gave this move question mark. That's right. The most obvious move in the world. Serious strategic mistake. I'm going to show you a better move for Black after coming back. But who wants to answer the question? Why is this a strategic mistake? How could you punish it? Yep, you had to know the classics. That's the answer. If you did not know the Botvinnik game, yep, most of you are getting it. You know, how many of you probably castle without thinking in the blitz game? I would say if you didn't know about the Botvinnik game, maybe 90% of you will just castle right away. Strategically, that's not what white wants. Right? If you castle, what's going to happen? You're going to walk into this f-pawn push, and then they're going to prepare the g-pawn push, and you got to really know how to defend those positions, which may not be that easy. So f5 is coming. Luckily, though, white did not castle, and you guys got it right. h4, exclam. So that's why, going back, I think f5 is the best move for Black. You see how timing becomes everything. Before white gets a chance to play h4, h5 himself, Black needs to get really quick counterplay against the center. And yes, knight g5 may be a little annoying, but after knight f6, the bishop does a good defensive job. These positions are quite common in King's Indian. White sometimes plays knight e6, pawn takes, but it's double-edged usually. All right, so let's go back to the game. So the most logical move on the board, castles, could be a strategic mistake if you know how to take advantage of it. So I think everyone got this move correct, h4. But let's continue. The game continues. f5. How would you continue as white? White to move. All right, so most of you already know the general theme here, right? h5, exclam. Very simple. Knight g5 was interesting, but the problem, again, like I showed you earlier, knight f6, you're not really creating that many threats yet. All right, so black has a dilemma, guys. The typical f4 and checkmate in white is going to backfire because white did not castle. White can castle queenside. Taken looks pretty bad. What to do? What to do? So he played knight c5, hitting the e pawn, knight g5. Very logical move, right? Well, now black decides to simply play h6, b4. Very important intermezzo move, b4, because you don't want to waste the tempo retreating the knight. Okay, so this is very important move, b4, hitting the knight, knight takes, pawn takes. And here, guys, we come to another very important crossroads. So in this position, white plays pawn takes g6. Okay, and it looks as though white's going to take on e4 next and have a nice strategic pressure. So in the game, black plays knight takes g6, g3. Interesting decision. Notice that he understands this knight takes e4 also results in some counterplay with the knight jump in here, because you never want to take on f4. So he preemptively, again, see how this whole h4 idea is very prophylaxis. Think of Nimzovich and Petrosian. Those guys are famous players who are really good in prophylactic thinking. You've probably seen a lot of example games. So here we're stopping knight f4, and black has to do something about this position. Bishop takes h6 may be coming up at some point. So he played bishop f5, which I think is too slow. I don't like that move at all. It's a static position where black's extra pawn on e4 is totally meaningless. This guy is weak, and I'm not sure what he was hoping for. Maybe he was hoping white will just take on h6 right away. But the way you solve static problems, and this is a great example, you have to sense the dynamic factors, such as white's uncastled king. So how would you try to solve? I mean, black is probably a little bit worse, but you can still solve one of your major problems using dynamics, tactical means, that is. So if you're black, so I see a good idea here. How would you approach this position? Interesting idea. Queen f6, bishop e3, knight f4. Yeah, problem with queen f6, though, you do walk into knight takes e4. But yeah, you're thinking in the right direction. Knight f4 is a great idea. Doesn't quite work. But there's another way to generate counterplay. Yes. Good job, Eric. e3. This is a sign of a good King's Indian player, trying to change the position from static to dynamic. Yep, you want to try to open up the bishop. Yeah, good job, Angela. Yep, so now white's got to do this. And of course, the follow-up is e4. I think white is still better after a very accurate move, rook c1 here. Leaving the king on e1 is okay for the moment. But what's interesting about this position, white also has a dynamic way to try to fight for the initiative with knight takes pawn, hoping that black will take the rook on a1. And then white's going to have a really powerful attack. I believe white is better. Typical exchange sacrifice in the style of Petrosian. So, but you can play this game, right? You don't have to sacrifice. You don't have to accept the sacrifice as black. You can simply play bishop f5 and hit the knight. And active play, active bishops do compensate for the lack of pawn here. I think black is doing okay. So knight e4 is not good. I think white should keep the position closed, e-file closed at rook c1, with a minimal advantage. Maybe I would say plus equals at best. But look how the game unfolds. So black misses this opportunity. He plays a super logical development move. White just says, no, I'm not going to take the pawn on h6. Now, both bishops are totally dead, and the knight is dead. There's really no knight moves. So black is utterly paralyzed. This is example of strategic triumph. Couple more moves, and black is ready to resign. Yeah, this already Knight h8 is a sign something has gone terribly wrong. And now bishop g4. Of course, you want to trade the light square bishops. Queen d7, takes. And I really like how white solves all his strategic ideas with a simple move. Queen h5. So yeah, I'm going to answer that question about knight f4 jump. I think here we can already stop and say plus over minus easily, if not more, right? Again, strategically, black has lost. So there's one question here, guys. Knight f4 jump. Very interesting indeed, although I think insufficient. Insufficient because you're hitting both guys, but I can just play bishop d4. And it looks quite scary for white's king, but at the moment, at least, I don't see any issues. Rook g1 is coming, right? Looks okay, extra piece. So what did we learn? We learned that in this position, black made a strategic mistake by castling, and white immediately seized the opportunity to push this h-pawn. I can see you get into King's Indian type of structures with either side, right? Especially for those of you who play King's Indian positions. This is essential knowledge, pushing the rook pawn. Not necessarily Alpha Zero style all the way to h6, although that is very much popular and quite strong, but just to h5, just to stop this f5 push. And then, depending on the situation, either take or put it on h6. Okay, so I hope you guys have been mastering this concept. You're all experts now from these two examples. So I'm going to throw at you some other examples. All right. So let's start with this game between a Dutch player, Van der Doel Eric. I think he became a grandmaster, although I'm not sure, against Gennady Sasonko. And Sasonko is a originally Russian player. Funny enough, he's also from the same city as Korchnoi, St. Petersburg, right? So he actually moved to the Netherlands, and that's why he's playing in the Dutch Championship, right, in 1997. So he's already past his prime, but his understanding of chess is really good. Evan says his h4 is going to be favorite move. Good. All right, let's take a look, guys. Same concepts that we've learned so far. G3, okay. D5. What are we getting here? Are you getting the sense we're getting some kind of reverse King's Indian? That's right. Reversed openings are sometimes quite popular. Okay. D3 is played. One should say, well, if King's Indian is playable as black, shouldn't it be even better to play it as white? Don't you have an extra tempo? Well, it's not so simple as you're going to see in this game. Bishop e7. A little bit odd looking move at first, but he has an idea. This is called, again, if you think about King's Indian in the reverse, this is called the Averbach variation, named after the oldest living grandmaster in the world, who is, I believe, age 99, who is still, I think, alive in Russia, Averbach. So you can look him up. So e4, typical King's Indian move. Notice how black is a little bit behind to protect the d pawn. So he simply plays knight f6. And now white, of course, can take and get into this famous structure and play rook e1, f6, right, c3, basically playing this line, the tempo up. But I'm not so sure how bad it is for black. Instead, he plays knight c3, playing the main line, the main idea of reverse color. d4, knight e2. Again, we have a classic King's Indian, guys. With reverse color, white is up a tempo. Oh, okay, so February 8th, he is 100. Very, very cool. Yeah, so yeah, he's really legendary, Averbach. So how many of you would play, in Blitz especially, castles, if you have this position as black? Autopilot move castles. How many of you would play that move? Not me. Yes, not me, probably me. But not today. That's the answer, guys. All right, so be a little bit more aware of your strategic concepts. All right, let's take a look. Knight d7. What on earth is this move? Are we supposed to develop our pieces, not undevelop them and lock our own pieces? Like this bishop is getting locked? Can black go for the Makagonov with h6, g5, rook g8? Yeah, that's interesting. Definitely h6, g5 is interesting. But what is this knight d7 move? Who can explain to me this move? I mean, Sasonko is not a weak GM, right? He used to be, what, top 20, top 30 in the world. I'm not sure about preparing f5. I'm not sure if you want to do that and open up that bishop. g5, h5, h4. Okay, we're getting close. Okay. We're getting close. g5, not a bad idea. So what is the idea behind knight d7? f5? Nope, not f5. So you're going to see it shortly, guys. Knight d2 is played. Why is he playing this move knight d7? Why? The reason is white's typical plan here is to play f4. Okay? And we already know what's going to happen when he moves the knight to e1 or to d2. Everybody by now knows the answer how black plays next. f4 is coming. Again, castle makes no sense, right? You're just going to walk into the attack. So my question is, how would you play as black? Okay, 100% of you will get this one right on the test. And the move here is h5 exclam. Castle's autopilot blitz move, no good. f4 is coming. If you play f6, f5, and then you have to deal with this h4, g4, and then slowly transfer all the pieces over, g5. There's this plan. Basically, your king is going to be under attack, under siege for many, many moves. No good. Don't do that. Instead, counter strike and preemptive strike with h5. f4 was played. h4 is the method here. So notice we don't even get the knight on g4 yet. It's a long road, but it doesn't matter. Conceptually, this is how you stop the attack. Now, the funny part is being what? The fact that black had a whole tempo down. Notice he never castled, right? So that actually helped him a little bit. So this whole concept about tempi in the King's Indian is a really not that trivial, because sometimes you don't want to castle. Well, the next part of the game is absolutely strategic masterpiece. I want to show you a little bit more before I show you my next example. So knight f3 is played, logical move, right? Typical King's Indian style. h3. Well, guess what? In 1997, there was no AlphaZero, but strong grandmasters definitely knew about this concept. Bishop h1, okay. So now I can't play kid anymore. Okay, that's right. Now everyone's going to be preparing for you. All right, what's next though, guys? Bishop h1 is played. How can black build up on his initiative here? So we got the pawn to h3. So knight f6, knight g4, interesting, yeah. Okay, let's see what he played. That's what he played. Yeah, very logical. So now you go a5, a4, a3. I think we're already happy with the g4 square, right? We're not going to play a5, a4, a3 yet. So wait, why was the knight going back and forth? Very good question from Davis, right? So remember, the knight went all the way back to d7. Now we're going all the way back to f6. What does this knight do and going back and forth like crazy? Who can help us out and answer Davis's question? This is a very good question. So remember how in the way back we played knight d7, and then now we're going back to f6? Yeah, so one of the reasons knight goes to d7 is when you play the move h5 way early, and I mean way early here, right? You're thinking maybe you're many steps ahead of your opponent. You're going to play h5. He's going to go to knight e1 or knight d2. You're going to play h4. And guess what? Your knight is going to go to g4. The problem is he doesn't have to move the knight, right, guys? He has other ideas to his disposal. So that's one of the things you have to know. The timing has to be perfect when you play moves like h5, because right now, h4 is not a realistic threat. He has several ways to play. For instance, he can play bishop g5 if he wants. So yes, you do want your opponent to commit to f4 plan, so where you can play h4 yourself. Another interesting move here is knight h4 with idea knight f5. So he does have some extra options after the move h5, but the knight d7 is a very, very sneaky move, because white doesn't quite know what black wants, and we are taking control over these two squares. That's also important in these King's Indian type of structures. And then once the knight is going back, now we play here. And the problem is, if he stops the plan altogether, f4 is really going to be not a good plan. If you play f4, this g4 outpost is super weakened. That's right, Angela. Yep, this g4 outpost is really weak. If you play f3, that's a defensive structure. This bishop is not super happy, very passive, and there's really no easy way to stop this push. h3, we still play our plan, and if you play g4, well, guess what? Now we got some dark squares to work with. Maybe bishop here, knight's coming here. Very unpleasant position indeed. Strategically, you can leave the king on e8. So one thing that we're learning about all these closed positions, how you can literally play with your king in the middle of the board. Not too afraid. All right, so that was an excellent question, and good job, guys, figuring out the answer to it. So now that we've reached this kind of classic advantage position, let's see what happened next. So knight d2, again, he's playing too statically, right? He's thinking, well, yeah, this knight is going to come here. I'm probably going to organize some counterplay. I don't like that style at all. I think strategically, you're losing the battle. You have to fight for the initiative dynamically. And the right answer is take on e5. Takes. We already know the drill, right? You got to really go and sacrifice when you want to get counterplay. e6. Everybody should know now by this concept, right? Bishop takes, knight f4. Now, e5 here is interesting, but I don't think it's necessary. This is good enough with the threat of knight takes or knight d5. This should probably be enough for maintaining equality. I call this counterplay. So it's not a clear-cut advantage yet for black, but it's definite counterplay. Well, guess what happened after knight going back here? Knight g4. Knight b1. That's a really dubious move, but I don't know what he was thinking. Obviously, he did not like knight c4 because of probably b5, I'm guessing. But yeah, at least he should play knight f3. I mean, you got to go knight f3 back. Yeah, I know it's going back and forth. Psychologically, it's hard to admit your mistake. But at least you got to really attack the e5 pawn. Still some resemblance that you can get counterplay. Yeah, of the Karpov game, interesting. So knight b1. So now black is clearly better. He played g5, very interesting move. I actually like b5 too. b5 is quite logical in these positions. Just grab as much space as you can. But there's nothing wrong with g5. Okay, bishop f3 was played. Pawn takes, and now the attack plays itself. Rook g8. Wait a second, aren't you supposed to attack as white in this King's Indian structure, right? Reverse King's Indian. Instead, who is getting attacked? Black is getting attack against white's king. How crazy is this? Again, thanks to the h5, h4 plan. So this is already a winning position. Maybe I'll show you a couple more moves. Knight here, bishop there, just total domination, right? We're just crashing through. So let's watch how the game unfolds. Two bishops, g-file, excellent position for black. Queen e1, walking into a pin. Simply queen d7. Guess what? We're going to castle queenside. a3. A little bit too late with counterplay there. castles. B4. C4. Very nice idea. Again, not giving him even a sliver of hope. Knight D2. Pawn takes. Nice outpost. Yeah, just total domination. Question from Aryan: how does a King's Indian player counter this H5 pawn? Well, remember how I said timing is important, right? So that's why you don't just blindly go for this plan. Maybe wait for, White should have waited for black to castle kingside, perhaps, and then White should start pushing the f pawn. So you gotta really be weighing all the options. So bishop takes g3, pawn takes. Yep, knight f3 is the right idea on. And yeah, this is pretty much game over. So I want to show you this nice intermezzo check. He just goes for checkmate, guys. Simply going for checkmate. Check, resign. King g1, rook g3. Wow, what a beating, right? And it's all because of this h5, h4 idea. So White did not see that idea a mile away, and he paid the price. So this is a very important concept. Okay, now we're going to go into a little bit more modern times because we're still in 1997, right? Chess history is evolving very slowly. So let's take a look at the modern game. Now, Kramnik needs no introduction. A lot of the times he is the perfect example on how to play chess from a strategic point of view. This time, though, he's going to be getting a lesson from a German grandmaster, Georg Meyer, who I'm sure you guys have heard. He's quite active online, does a lot of blitz. He's a very strong player. During this game, back in 2014, he's only 26-32. Kramnik is 27-77. Clearly, he is a favorite in this game. And Kramnik plays c4. Okay, we're going to look at it from the black perspective. c5, knight f3. Okay, looks quite symmetrical. g3, knight c6, all theory, bishop g2, inviting to play Marat-Sebain structure. So if pawn takes d5, knight takes d5, this is called the reverse Marat-Sebain. White castles. That is a very serious invitation. You're giving up the center for black to do what? To simply play d4, and that's what Meyer does. Well, doesn't this ring a bell, the structure? Isn't this a reversed opening? Who can tell me what kind of reversed opening is this? Benoni. That's right, guys. Not quite the English, it's a Benoni. So in the Benoni, you're actually going for this e3, e takes d, right? The pawn going here, then you're going to get a3, b4 kind of counterplay. All right, so that's the invitation to reverse Benoni. He plays a3. He's trying to play maybe the Benko gambit, guys. Maybe b4 is coming. He's being extremely flexible with all of his plans. Meyer says, I'm not interested in any of these weird flank openings. I'm just going to play e5, and I'm going to play a5. Very straightforward chess, right? So why is Kramnik playing reversed openings here? He wants to win. He's a high-rated player, and he says, I don't mind playing Benoni or King's Indian structure. I'm going to play e4. And by now, you should probably realize one important factor. Who can tell me what is the difference between these positions and the classical, King's Indian with normal colors? This is reverse color. You should notice something here about these positions. Position is closed, okay. c5, c4 pawns, but that's normal. I mean, that's kind of old Indian formation, reverse color. Eric is picking up ideas. Bishop e7, knight d7, h5. So one of the things you should notice is that because black did not castle, that gives him the option of this h5, h4 in the future. Push carry the h pawn. Once again, timing has to be perfect. If you start with h5 right now, makes no sense. He can play bishop g5, right? He can play knight h4, right? The move h5 has to be timed perfectly. So look what Meyer does. Bishop e7 first. He thinks, or maybe Kramnik thinks, what? That black is getting ready to castle, right? That's probably the most logical move. So he plays knight e1. Terrible mistake. Knight e1 is too naive. He is underestimating Meyer. He thinks Meyer's going to castle. I'm going to play f4, f5. Boom, boom, boom. Transfer all my pieces. Checkmate the king. The problem, guys, is that black did not commit the king. Push, harry the h-pawn. Herald. Yeah, everyone is rooting for h-pawn. All right, let's see if Meyer did it, guys. Yep, he did it. He did play h5. Again, I don't like castle because of f4. Okay, so don't castle in these positions. So again, what are we learning from all these examples? That, you know, in the Botvinnik original example against Korchnoi, he did castle, but the position was a little different when he played h5, h4. A lot of the times, especially in the opening, you don't want a castle for that plan to be very effective. So it's actually okay to be tempo down, as we see yet another example here. Okay, but the game continues. Okay, Kramnik is going to fight back. He plays f4. He says, you know what? You're kind of lacking development there, my friend. So what if you play h4? I'm still going to get counterplay. Okay, h4, very thematic, right? f5. Kramnik says, I'm still going to checkmate you. Right? So he's got this typical King's Indian structure to attack the enemy king. But with a huge drawback, the h file. Okay, guys? So pawn takes, pawn takes. It actually is not in black's intention to castle. So this would be a pretty terrible move. Why? You already have the h file. You don't need the king there on g8 at all. It's quite happy on e8. So who can answer my next question? How would you continue as black? So everybody noticed the difference here is that there's no knight g4, right? So that's important to know that. Okay, a4, a lot of people are thinking, I'm not really sure if you want to play a4, maybe, but it's not like b4 is a threat. So b4 is not a threat. Why play a4? Knight h5, very logical move. I like knight h5 with idea bishop g5. It does kind of flow naturally from the position. Okay, any other ideas? Knight h7. Okay, Ryan is proposing same idea to try to get to the g5. So again, positionally it's sound. Any other ideas besides knight h5, knight h7? These are definitely sound ideas. Aha, king d7 and double on the h file. Very cool idea. King d7, unusual move, but it makes sense. King is quite happy on c7. So all of these ideas do ring a bell, but actually what Meyer does, he plays g6. Now that is a cool move. You're opening up the enemy king, right? White's king is doing some self-destructing there, right? What is white doing? White opened the h file. Now white's about to open f or the g file. And whoever said you can simply run the king here is absolutely correct, or even castle. The king doesn't need to go to the king side at all. And we already know the drawback of taking on g6. You are giving up the g4 outpost. I like Greg the g-pawn. Okay. Okay, knight d2. All right, Kramnik obviously doesn't want to give up the g4 outpost easily. Pawn takes, pawn takes. Now the game is getting a little double-edged, it may seem at first. We've got the bishop opened up. We've got the knight coming to e4. On the other hand, if the other rook gets to g8, it's almost game over, right? We've got two massively powerful rooks looking at the enemy king. So rook g8, he played in the game. He actually allows another important strategic concept that Kramnik could have used, a defensive concept. I actually prefer, believe it or not, king d7 move right now. I think this is the best move. And then the queen can swing to g8. But the most important idea is after rook g8, white does have a defensive idea. So who can tell me this defensive idea? Very, very instructive idea. Actually, Kramnik missed this idea. Maybe he was still entertaining the idea of playing for a win. He probably overestimated his position. So, okay, guys, focus. What is the defensive idea that white can execute? I'll give you a hint. Petrosian is the sort of the father of this idea. A lot of strategic examples, you see Petrosian use this idea as white. Exchange sack. Well, there are no exchange sacks here. Think of some other idea. How can white... Okay, bishop e4. I'm not really sure the point of bishop e4. What if I take on g3? Okay, guys, try to think of a good idea. Okay, knight e4. Good idea using the blockade, but very close. Knight e4, very close, but not quite. Again, guys, keep an eye. There's a g3 pawn there. That's a little bit weak. Okay, no one has got this one yet. I'm surprised. Maybe we need a whole lesson on this. I'm sure you guys have seen examples of this move. Very unusual move, but extremely effective against King's Indian formation. Nope, no one's got it. Yep, Ryan's got it. All right, good job. So guys, the move here is actually the most unusual move in the world. You're giving up your most valuable piece. Bishop takes c6. You probably did not even consider a move like that, but that's a defensive idea. Now you lock up the game for good, and then you simply play king g2. And guess what? Black actually wants to give up that c6 pawn. It's blocking the bishop. The bishop is dead. It's a defensive idea, and then you use the blockade and e4 outpost. Okay, so let's see what happens if this happens. King d7. I still like king d7 here. Queen e2, or maybe queen f3. I don't know where the queen belongs. And now knight e4. Trying to lock up the position with close to equality. Still lots of fight left, but I believe it's going to be very difficult to break through. So psychologically, maybe Kramnik wasn't quite ready to start playing defensive chess. So instead, I'll show you how the game unfolds. He played queen f3. A lot of people did propose queen f3. Not a good move. Strategically, white is still busted. Simply bishop d7, rook f2, trying to play a waiting move. Queen b6. Guess what? Black is winning the game on both ends. The king side, white is losing the battle. Now black is taking over the queen side. Rook e2, castle, queen side. We saw that move coming a mile away. The moment black played h5, h4, the king belongs on the queen side. b4 is never an issue because it's so well protected that b4 is really not going anywhere. That's the Benoni plan, right? So Kramnik played knight e4, logical move. Queen b3, simply locking things up. Knight f2, a4. So I call this total domination on the entire board. White has absolutely no counterplay, guys. Finally, ended the a pawn. Yeah, finally, guys. And that's it. The rest is more or less, trying to convert this beautiful idea. This domination to win. All right, so how does one do that? It's not easy, right? His only weaknesses are well protected. Well protected, well protected, well protected. No entry squares for our pieces yet. So you have to be patient. That's the key. You got to be patient and slowly improve your position. So bishop h6 was played by Kramnik. I mean, that's really not easy to get your pieces on squares. So he found a square for the bishop. Bishop f8. We already know that strategically you want to trade dark square bishops here. So bishop takes, rook takes, g4. Not a move you want to play, but what else? You got to overprotect the g pawn. Now the knight on f2 is at least doing very good defensive job. Rook g7, knight e4, and simply knight takes knight. There is no need to avoid the trade. Queen takes e4. Double, hitting the g pawn, by the way. Bishop f3 protects it. And f6. All right, guys. Look at this position. Still, what happened in the beginning, right? How the h pawn, it all is part of the same plan. This king is really in danger. All right, let's see what's next. Rook g2, trying to play defensive chess. Knight d8. Although, other than knight d8, I honestly don't see any way for black to improve. But I want to ask you one final question. What is the winning plan for black? There's really nothing else, if you guys think about it. Transferring the rooks to the h file, maybe, but I'm not really sure. Yeah, you get access to h1, but he can just play some defensive move there. Plus, you got to watch out for the g5 break. Yeah, knight d8, knight f7, knight g5, potentially bishop c6. I like that plan from Ryan. Yep, knight d8. So yeah, a couple of you guys already picking up the idea. So one of the key features of the move knight d8 is not only threatening bishop c6, although that's quite annoying, but you guys picked up on the idea that the knight can get to this square, this g5 square, and then white's position is going to collapse. Be careful about the b5 plan. It is a typical plan, but not with the king on c8. So Brian, be careful about that plan. Although without the queens on the board, b5 is still an option. With the queens, looks a little risky. All right, so let's take a look what happened. So knight d8 is the simplest plan. So you got the two threats of bishop c6 and knight f7. So Kramnik goes back. So why not trade his most active bishop, right? That's his really only active piece. Bishop takes, pawn takes. And this is maybe not a very typical move. A lot of you might have just taken with the knight on autopilot, but I really like this move because he says, my knight doesn't belong on c6. As far as the pawn structure is concerned, it's easily protectable. I can play here. It does open the b file, and we still have this idea, and we still have this idea. So this b takes c6 is actually quite logical. Again, total domination. All right, let's see what's next. Queen e4, simply king c7. And there's really no stopping knight f7, honestly, guys. This is just a really tough position for white to play. So Kramnik, being former world champ, world-class player, is simply going to fall apart. Knight f3 he tries, simply knight f7. Finally, he got all the pieces to the king side, but with knight d6, black has taken over the game. Notice he doesn't even need knight g5. And now he wins the pawn. And he wins another pawn. Knight here, so some tactics. Both the knight and the queen are under attack, but luckily he has rook takes g2 with check, very important intermezzo. Right, everything's with check, king takes, and now the queen can simply take. So this is already resignable. But okay, Kramnik probably in time pressure plays on. I just want to show you the finish. Black just takes everything, gobble, gobble, gobble. Queen b2, queen e7, and that's it. No checks. You can take the f pawn, the e pawn, who cares? The a pawn is winning. Never resign, you guys. Yeah. Well, here Kramnik, I guess he reached move 40, maybe time pressure. He decided he's not going to try his luck, completely lost. So what did we learn in this game? So let me roll back all the way here. How it all began. It all began with the Botvinnik preemptive strike, right? The famous H pawn. So notice how he never castled, right? He plays bishop e7. Kramnik thinks, oh, he's going to castle. So knight e1 was not probably the most accurate move in the world. I don't know what I would recommend. With the pawn on a3, this plan doesn't work. Knight d2 will lock the bishop. I mean, it's kind of hard. Maybe you got to play moves like this. Maybe rook a2 and you can swing. It's hard to give white a great advice here, but you definitely don't want to play moves like knight e1 before black gets a chance to play. Yeah, once knight e1 and black plays h5, black didn't castle, this position is really uncomfortable. I will probably never play King's Indian again. Wow. I would not necessarily say this plan refutes the King's Indian, but those are pretty strong words. And now with h5, h4, this plan is tough. So basically, for those of you who do play the King's Indian, I'm not saying this opening is refuted. What I'm saying is you have to really take everything into consideration. If your opponent hasn't castle and has a very simple plan, don't just give that plan to him, right? Don't just go back. You have options, right? Like I said, remember that Meyer doesn't want to play h5 yet. He wants to wait. So this is a very complex strategic game. And even great players like Korchnoi, Kramnik, right? We saw them make mistakes. So King's Indian structures are really complicated. You have to know when to push the pawn to h5 or vice versa to h4 when you're playing white. And this is the kind of stuff that even the best players in the world sometimes make mistakes. So this is very important strategic lessons. And also important note, don't autopilot castle in these closed structures, right? Black, actually, by leaving the king on e8, has this extra option. So this is a very important moment. So sometimes castling in the King's Indian is not what you want to do. All right, so with that, I hope everyone is now armed to the teeth with this h-pawn storm, and you can readily play it as you know your opponent is playing King's Indian structure. Thank you, guys. Goodbye.